Anzio, Italy, February 18, 1944, 0347 hours. Lieutenant Richard Morrison knelt beside a dying soldier. The boy, 19, maybe 20, had taken shrapnel to the femoral artery. Blood pooled on the tent floor. "Plasma!" Morrison shouted. 30 seconds later, a bottle of amber liquid hung above the stretcher. The boy's pulse steadied. Color returned to his face. He'd live. Morrison had performed this procedure 11 times tonight. 11 soldiers who should have died. 10 were still breathing. 200 yards away, Oberarzt Klaus Richter faced different mathematics. A young Gefreiter was carried in. Same injury. Femoral artery severed. Same age, 19. Same desperate eyes. Richter checked his supply. 3 units of whole blood. Just 3. He had 14 more critical patients waiting. "Morphine," Richter said quietly. "Make him comfortable." The Gefreiter died 23 minutes later. 2 soldiers, same wound, same night. One lived because behind him stood a system that could move blood from Iowa to Italy in 4 days. The other died because behind him stood a logistics network collapsing under its own complexity. This is not a story about medicine. This is a story about what happens when industrial capacity meets human need. About how America won World War II not with better doctors or braver soldiers, but with a supply chain that could deliver miracles faster than the enemy could deliver death. This is the story of the blood that never ran out. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1940. Dr. Charles Drew stood in his laboratory at Presbyterian Hospital, holding a bottle of amber liquid that would change military medicine forever. Drew was a black surgeon and researcher studying blood preservation. The problem was simple but devastating. Whole blood spoiled within days. Even refrigerated, it lasted perhaps a week. In wartime, maintaining fresh blood at the front was nearly impossible. But Drew had discovered something remarkable. What if you didn't need whole blood? What if you only needed plasma, the liquid component minus the cells? Plasma could prevent shock. It could buy time. It could keep a wounded soldier alive long enough to reach surgery. And critically, plasma could be dried into powder, stored indefinitely, and reconstituted with water when needed. Even more important, plasma didn't require blood type matching. Any plasma could go into any soldier. Drew's experiments proved it worked. The question was, could it be produced at scale? In early 1941, the British were desperate. The Blitz was killing thousands. London hospitals were overwhelmed. They needed blood, but ships carrying whole blood across the Atlantic arrived with spoiled cargo. Drew was appointed Director of Blood for Britain, a pilot program to test whether plasma could be mass-produced and shipped overseas. The results stunned everyone. Plasma arrived in London in perfect condition after 12 days at sea. British surgeons transfused it into bombing victims. Survival rates soared. But Britain's needs were small compared to what was coming. If America entered the war, the scale required would be unprecedented. Not thousands of units, millions. Drew designed the system like an engineer designing a factory. Standardized collection, identical processing, automated bottling, everything optimized for industrial scale. But industrial scale required something that had never existed, a nationwide network to collect blood from millions of civilians and deliver it to soldiers on the other side of the world. It would require a miracle of logistics. But discovery was one thing, production was another. To actually save lives, Drew's plasma would need quantities the world had never seen. It would need industrial capacity that didn't yet exist. It would need America. Washington, D.C., January 1941. The American Red Cross was given an impossible mission: create a national blood program in less than a year. To understand the scale, in 1940, the entire American medical system collected perhaps 50,000 units of blood annually for emergency surgeries. The Red Cross goal? 100,000 units per month by 1942. They would need to recruit millions of donors, build dozens of processing centers, establish refrigerated storage networks, create a distribution system that could move blood from Iowa to Italy in under a week. They would need to industrialize mercy. Drew approached it like Henry Ford approached car manufacturing. Every donation station identical. Every processing center following the same protocols. Every shipment through the same cold chain. But efficiency meant nothing without volunteers. They launched the most successful public relations campaign in American history. "Give blood, save lives" posters appeared everywhere. Movie stars gave blood on camera. Baseball games paused for blood drives. Churches, schools, factories, all became donation sites. The pitch was simple. You can't fight on the front lines, but you can save a soldier's life. 30 minutes and a pint of blood makes you part of the war effort. It worked beyond expectations. January 1941, 5,000 units collected. December 1941, 50,000 units per month. By 1944, 150,000 units per month. Over the war, 13 million Americans donated blood, nearly 10% of the entire population. Among them, Helen Morrison, 34, who worked the day shift at a munitions plant in Davenport, Iowa. Twice a month, she stopped by the Red Cross station in the plant cafeteria and donated blood. She didn't think much of it. Everyone was doing something for the war effort. Donating blood seemed like the least she could do. Helen never knew whose life her blood saved. The system was anonymous by design, but statistically, over 2 years of donations, Helen's blood likely saved 4 or 5 soldiers' lives. 4 or 5 young men came home because Helen spent 30 minutes every 2 weeks giving blood. But collection was just the beginning. Getting that blood to soldiers who needed it required logistics that seemed impossible. Blood collected in New York on Monday needed to be in a field hospital in France by Thursday. That meant collection Monday morning, processing by evening, trucking to port Tuesday, loading onto ship Wednesday, ocean crossing through U-boat waters, unloading in England, distribution to hospitals by week's end. Every step had to work perfectly, or soldiers died. The American response was overwhelming redundancy. They shipped twice as much as needed. If half was lost, enough still got through. They established duplicate supply chains. If one route was cut, 3 others existed. The result? American field hospitals never ran out of plasma. Not in North Africa, not in Italy, not in France, not in the Pacific. Never. The blood moved like clockwork. But could Germany match it? What happened next would reveal a chasm in industrial capacity that would decide the war. Berlin, Germany, 1942. Dr. Ernst Grawitz, Reich health leader, reviewed intelligence reports that should have been impossible. American soldiers were surviving wounds that killed German soldiers in the field. Hemorrhagic injuries that should be fatal were being treated successfully by American medics within minutes. The reports described something called plasma, dried blood that could be reconstituted with water and administered anywhere, immediately. Germany had nothing comparable. Grawitz ordered the development of a German plasma program. But Germany in 1942 faced a problem America didn't. They were already losing the production war. Creating a plasma system like America's required industrial capacity, factories to process blood, produce bottles, create sterile equipment. Germany's factories were maxed out producing tanks and ammunition. It required transportation infrastructure, trucks, ships, refrigeration units. Germany's logistics were stretched thin, moving weapons and troops. It required mass civilian participation, millions of donors giving regularly. Germany's exhausted population struggled to meet minimal targets. The German plasma program never got off the ground. By 1943, German field hospitals operated under a triage system that would have been unthinkable to American doctors. salvageable patients only. If you had a wound that required significant resources, including blood, you were classified as expectant, the medical euphemism for will be allowed to die because we cannot afford to save you. Oberarzt Klaus Richter kept a journal throughout the war. His entries from late 1943 make for devastating reading. February 3, 1944. 3 units of blood arrived today, had 14 critical cases. Chose the 3 with best chances, morphine for the rest. March 17, 1944. No blood for 9 days. Performing surgeries I know will fail because patient will bleed out post-op. But I must try. April 22, 1944. Heard Americans captured one of our hospitals. The American medic had more plasma in his pack than our entire hospital has received in a month. The question haunted German medical officers. How do you fight an enemy that can save its soldiers when you cannot save yours? The answer was, you don't. Eastern Front, winter 1944. A German battalion took casualties from Soviet artillery. 3 men with severe shrapnel wounds, all 3 bleeding heavily. All 3 needed immediate transfusions. The battalion medical officer had no blood. All 3 men died over 6 hours while medics tried to compress wounds with their bare hands. That night, one soldier wrote a letter intercepted by Soviet intelligence. We are not losing because we lack courage. We are losing because when our men fall, they die, and when American men fall, they live. How do you maintain morale when soldiers know a wound is a death sentence? He deserted 2 weeks later, one of hundreds of thousands. The collapse of German military medicine didn't just kill soldiers, it destroyed morale. It made every battle more costly. It turned survivable wounds into fatalities. And Klaus Richter was about to witness the moment that would haunt him for 40 years. Charles Drew never saw the full system he created reach its potential. In April 1941, after establishing Blood for Britain and designing the Red Cross system, Drew left to become chief surgeon at Freedman's Hospital in Washington, one of the few prestigious positions available to Black doctors in segregated America. The system continued without him, but it carried a wound Drew couldn't fix: segregation. In 1941, the Red Cross, under military pressure, established a policy. Black and white blood would be stored separately. Blood from Black donors would only go to Black soldiers. The policy was medical nonsense. Plasma has no racial characteristics. Blood typing depends on antigens, not melanin. But segregation wasn't about medicine, it was about ideology. Drew was horrified. He protested publicly. In a 1942 radio interview, "There is absolutely no scientific basis to indicate any difference in blood according to race." His protests were ignored. The policy remained until 1950, 5 years after the war ended. Drew died in 1950 in a car accident. He was 45. But the system he created saved thousands. Normandy, June 1944. Private Eddie Martinez took shrapnel to the leg. Femoral artery severed. An American medic, former construction worker, 12 weeks of training, pulled a plasma bottle from his pack, hung it on Martinez's rifle stuck in the ground, started the transfusion. 3 minutes. Martinez's pulse stabilized. He was evacuated to a field hospital within the hour. Surgery successful. He survived. Martinez returned to New Mexico after the war, named his daughter Helen, after the unknown donor whose blood saved his life. Across the hedgerow, Gefreiter Hans Becker had the same wound, same age as Martinez, same desperation in his eyes. His company medical officer had no blood. The nearest depot with supplies was 40 kilometers away, and the roads were under artillery fire. Morphine, the medical officer said. Becker took 6 hours to die. The medical officer stayed with him the entire time, holding his hand. Becker's last words, "Tell my mother I was brave." The medical officer tried to write that letter. He couldn't finish it. The words wouldn't come. After the war, American military researchers compiled data. For comparable wounds, American soldiers in 1944 had a 50% better survival rate than in 1942. The difference was plasma. German survival rates declined throughout the war as their medical system degraded. For a soldier shot through the femoral artery, American soldiers had an 85% chance of survival if they reached a medic within minutes. German soldiers had a 30% chance, because by the time they reached a hospital with blood, they'd already bled out. That 55% difference represents approximately 190,000 German soldiers who died of wounds that were survivable with adequate medical care. Not killed instantly, not heroically. They bled out slowly, waiting for blood that never came. Drew's plasma system saved American lives by the thousands. But the true miracle wasn't the plasma itself. It was the industrial system that moved it across oceans. And that system was about to face its greatest test. To understand how Helen Morrison's blood in Iowa reached Eddie Martinez in Normandy in 4 days, you must understand that blood was just one piece of a larger industrial revolution. World War II was the first truly industrial war, where production capacity mattered more than tactical brilliance. Helen Morrison donated blood Tuesday morning at the Red Cross station in her factory. That blood went to a processing center in Chicago where plasma was separated, dried, and bottled. The dried plasma was packed into crates, each containing 100 units. The crates were trucked to a warehouse in Newark, New Jersey. From there, loaded onto a Liberty ship bound for Southampton, England. But here's where it gets remarkable. The Liberty ship, SS John W. Brown, crossed the Atlantic in convoy, dodging U-boats, taking 12 days. On day 8, a U-boat torpedoed the ship 200 miles from port. The captain ordered plasma saved first, cargo second. 28 sailors died transferring plasma crates to lifeboats as the ship sank. The plasma reached Southampton. From there, trucked to a forward supply depot outside Portsmouth, then loaded onto LSTs, landing ship tank, for the channel crossing on D+3. The plasma landed on Omaha Beach on June 9th, 4 days after Helen donated it in Iowa. It reached a field hospital outside Carentan on June 10th. Eddie Martinez was wounded June 12th. The plasma that saved his life had traveled 4,000 miles through submarine-infested waters and across an active invasion beach. Total time? 10 days from Helen's arm to Eddie's vein. That wasn't medicine. That was logistics. That was industrial power. And it was backed by ruthless redundancy. When SS John W. Brown sank, 27 other ships in the convoy carried identical plasma shipments. When one truck was destroyed by artillery, 5 more carried the same supplies. When one field hospital ran low, 3 nearby depots could resupply within hours. The American supply chain was designed to survive catastrophic losses and still function. Germany couldn't match it. German plasma shipments, when they existed, traveled by truck from processing centers in Berlin to rail depots, by train to forward warehouses, then by truck again to field hospitals. Allied air superiority meant every truck, every train, every depot was a target. Loss rates exceeded 40%, and when a shipment was destroyed, there was no backup. German logistics had no redundancy. By 1944, German field hospitals were receiving perhaps 20% of requested supplies. American hospitals were receiving 110%, more than they asked for, because redundancy meant oversupply. The result was mathematical inevitability. In June 1944, American forces fielded approximately 80,000 hospital beds in the European theater. German forces fielded approximately 30,000 beds for a comparable number of troops. American combat hospitals maintained an average of 200 units of plasma per facility. German hospitals averaged 15 units of whole blood, when they had any at all. American medics carried plasma in their packs. Each medic could perform immediate transfusions in the field. German medics carried bandages and morphine. The gap wasn't medical skill. It was industrial capacity. The supply chain worked flawlessly. Plasma moved like clockwork from America to the front lines. But nobody had calculated what this meant for the men who didn't have it. Klaus Richter was about to learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible. Anzio, Italy, March 17, 1944, 14:35 hours. Klaus Richter had been a military surgeon for 3 years. He'd survived Stalingrad. He'd worked through the retreat from the Caucasus. He'd seen the best and worst of German military medicine. But nothing prepared him for what was about to happen. American offensive expected at 1500 hours. Richter's field hospital had prepared as best they could. He'd rationed his blood supply carefully. 27 units, enough for perhaps 12 surgeries if he was efficient. "We save who we can," he told his assistants. "It's mathematics." At 15:17, the casualties began arriving. Not 12 patients, 63. All critical, all needing blood. Now. Richter began triage. This one lives, this one dies. This one lives, this one dies. The mathematics were brutal. 27 units, 63 patients, 27 lives saved, 36 deaths accepted. He got to patient number 13, Gefreiter Paul Zimmermann, 19 years old, shrapnel through the abdomen, liver damage, massive internal bleeding, survivable with surgery and transfusion, fatal without. Richter looked at his remaining blood supply. 14 units for 51 patients still waiting. He did the mathematics. "Morphine," Richter said to his assistant. "Make him comfortable." Zimmermann looked up at Richter. "Herr Doctor, am I going to die?" Richter couldn't speak. He nodded. "Did I do something wrong?" Richter's voice broke. "No. You did everything right. I don't have enough blood to save you." Zimmermann died 40 minutes later. Richter stayed with him the entire time, holding his hand. When it was over, when the last of the 63 had been triaged, when 27 had been saved and 36 had died, Richter walked outside the tent. An American artillery spotter, captured that morning, was smoking a cigarette under guard. "How many?" the American asked in broken German. 36, Richter said. "Lack of supplies?" Richter nodded. The American was quiet for a moment. Then, "Our hospital 3 kilometers south treated 140 today. Nobody died waiting for blood." Richter stared at him. 140? "We have plasma to spare. Every medic carries it. Every field hospital is fully stocked. We never run out." That night, Richter wrote in his journal, "I am a good surgeon. I trained at the finest medical schools in Germany. I have years of experience. I know anatomy, physiology, surgical technique as well as any doctor alive. None of it matters when I have no blood to give. The Americans are not better doctors. They are better supplied. In modern war, that is the only thing that matters. I chose which of my patients would live and which would die today based on how much blood I had. I chose Paul Zimmermann to die because I needed to save blood for patients I hadn't even seen yet. The Americans don't choose. They save everyone because they have blood for everyone. That is not medicine. That is industry. And industry is winning this war." Richter's breaking point revealed the mathematical inevitability of German defeat, but the full scope of that mathematics was even more devastating than he knew. The numbers told a story that nobody wanted to see. The numbers don't lie. Over 4 years of war, American donations, 13 million. German donations, approximately 2 million. American plasma produced 6.8 million units. German plasma produced minimal, mostly whole blood. American distribution success rate, 86%, 14% lost to enemy action, accidents, spoilage. German distribution success rate, 58%, 42% lost to Allied bombing, interdiction. American combat hospitals that experience critical shortage, 0. German combat hospitals that experience critical shortage. Routine. But raw numbers don't capture the human cost. For comparable wounds, casualty survival rates, 1944. Femoral artery wound. American soldiers, 85% survival. German soldiers, 30% survival. Severe shrapnel requiring surgery. American soldiers, 78% survival. German soldiers, 51% survival. Combat wounds requiring immediate transfusion. American soldiers, 82% survival. German soldiers, 34% survival. That's not a small difference. That's the difference between industrial medicine and pre-industrial medicine. Over the course of the war, approximately 190,000 German soldiers died of wounds that likely would have been survivable with American-level medical care. Not killed instantly, not beyond saving. They bled out slowly, waiting for blood that never came. Klaus Richter, reviewing his own records after the war, calculated that of the patients he classified as expectant, too resource-intensive to save, approximately 60% would have survived with adequate blood supplies. Richter personally witnessed over 800 such deaths during his service in Italy and France. 60% of 800 is 480 soldiers. 480 young men who looked at Richter, trusting him to save them, and died because he had no blood. That number haunted him for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Morrison's field hospital at Anzio processed 147 casualties in a single day. 73 required plasma. Morrison's unit had 200 units in stock. Every soldier who needed plasma received it. Survival rate for hemorrhagic wounds, 82%. Same day, same wounds, different systems, different outcomes. Morrison wrote in a letter home, "We're winning because when our boys get hit, we can save them. It's that simple." Richter wrote in his journal, "I am a good surgeon. None of it matters." The mathematics were undeniable. But mathematics don't capture what it felt like to be Klaus Richter, making choices no doctor should have to make. His testimony, decades later, would reveal the true human cost of logistical failure. Klaus Richter survived the war. He returned to Stuttgart and practiced civilian medicine for 30 years. He never spoke about his wartime experiences. Until 1978. A German television documentary contacted him. They were making a film about military medicine in World War II. Would he share his story? Richter agreed. What he said, on camera, would become one of the most devastating testimonies in military medical history. The interviewer asked, "As a surgeon, what was your experience with medical supplies?" Richter was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I can still see their faces. Young men who looked at me, trusting me to save them. I had to tell them there was nothing I could do. Not because I lacked skill, not because their wounds were hopeless, but because I had no blood. They died slowly. Shock, then organ failure, then death. It took hours. I stayed with many of them. I couldn't save them, but I could make sure they weren't alone. After the war, I learned about the American plasma system, how American hospitals never ran out, how American medics could treat shock in the field, how American soldiers survived wounds that killed our boys. I felt rage, not at the Americans, they were right to save their soldiers, but at our leadership, at the decisions that sacrificed logistics for weapons production. Every soldier who died for lack of blood was murdered by administrative failure. Not killed in combat, murdered by bureaucracy." Richter broke down on camera at this point. The interview paused for several minutes. When he composed himself, he continued, "I became a doctor to save lives. In the war, I watched men die of wounds I could have treated, if I'd had blood. Every death was a failure. Not my failure as a doctor, but our failure as a nation to provide what was needed." The documentary aired in 1978. Richter received hundreds of letters from German veterans who'd witnessed the same failures. from families of soldiers who died of treatable wounds, from American veterans who'd been horrified to learn about German medical shortages. One letter stood out, from Richard Morrison, now a retired doctor in Philadelphia. Morrison wrote, "Dr. Richter, I saw your interview. I was the American doctor you heard about, the one treating casualties 3 kilometers from your hospital that day in March 1944. I want you to know, there was nothing you could have done differently. You were a good doctor working in an impossible system. I was a mediocre doctor working in a system that made me look like a miracle worker. The difference wasn't skill, it was industrial capacity. It was a housewife in Iowa spending 30 minutes to donate blood. It was the dozens of people who moved that blood across 4,000 miles of ocean. It was the supply chain that never failed. You're right to be angry, but not at yourself. You did everything you could. I'm sorry we couldn't share our supplies across the lines. War makes monsters of logistics. Respectfully, Richard Morrison." The two men met at a medical conference in 1985. They embraced. Two old doctors who'd fought the same war on different sides, united by the recognition that industrial capacity had mattered more than their skill. Morrison reflected in a 1987 interview, "People ask me about the horrors of war, about the trauma. And yes, I saw all that. But I also saw something miraculous, the industrialization of compassion. Every time I hung a bottle of plasma, I thought about the person who donated that blood. Some housewife in Iowa or factory worker in Detroit who would never meet the soldier they saved. And the dozens of people who made it possible, nurses who collected blood, technicians who processed it, truck drivers who moved it, sailors who risked U-boats to transport it. All of those people, most of whom never fired a shot, were saving lives as surely as I was. That's the real miracle of industrial warfare. It turned the entire home front into medics. The American blood system didn't end with the war. It became the foundation for civilian blood banking. Today, the American Red Cross collects over 6 million units per year, all thanks to the system Charles Drew designed in 1941. Modern trauma medicine, the golden hour principle that you must treat hemorrhagic shock within 60 minutes, is a direct descendant of the plasma revolution. When COVID-19 struck in 2020, the nations that responded most effectively treated it as an industrial problem. Test production, vaccine distribution, hospital capacity management. The nations that romanticized individual responsibility suffered worst. Industrial systems beat individual initiative in modern crises. That was true in 1944. It's still true today. The blood system changed how wars are fought and how lives are saved. But the lesson it taught extends far beyond medicine. It's a lesson about what happens when industrial capacity meets moral purpose. Lieutenant Richard Morrison died in 2003 at age 84. At his funeral, his daughter shared a story. Dad said that every time he hung a plasma bottle during the war, he thought about two people. First, the soldier he was saving. Second, the person who donated that blood, some stranger back home who would never meet the soldier they saved. Dad said that was the moment he understood what it meant to be American. Not the flag or the anthem, but millions of strangers saving each other's lives across oceans and continents. People who would never meet, connected by blood and by purpose. Klaus Richter died in 1982. His journal was published posthumously. The final entry, written in 1980, "I have spent 35 years trying to understand what happened in that war, why we lost, why my patients died while American patients lived. The answer is simple, though it took me decades to accept it. We lost because we couldn't supply our forces, not because our soldiers were less brave, not because our equipment was inferior, but because when our men fell, they died, and when American men fell, they lived. That difference, that simple, brutal difference, decided everything. American military medicine wasn't better because American doctors were more skilled. It was better because America could move miracles across oceans. Because housewives in Iowa donated blood on Tuesday, and that blood was in Italy by Friday. Because sailors died protecting plasma shipments from U-boats. Because the entire industrial capacity of a democratic nation focused on saving lives. We made masterpieces, tanks, planes, weapons. They made supply chains. Supply chains won. The blood that never ran out wasn't about blood. It was about the industrial capacity to move mercy across oceans, about the bureaucrats and factory workers who decided World War II as decisively as any general, about how modern war is won not with better tactics or braver soldiers, but with systems that refuse to fail. Final statistics: total American blood donations, 1941 to 1945. 13,384,735. Total plasma units produced, 6,804,000. American field hospitals that experience critical shortage, 0. American combat casualties, 1,076,245 American wounded who survived, 670,288, 62% survival rate. Estimated lives saved by plasma, 110,000 to 150,000. German wounded survival rate, 47%. Estimated German deaths due to inadequate medical supplies, 180,000 to 220,000. Today, the American Red Cross processes 6.8 million blood donations annually using the system Charles Drew designed in 1941. The blood still moves, the lives are still saved, and the lesson remains: industrial capacity, properly directed, can move miracles across oceans. Helen Morrison, the factory worker from Iowa, died in 1987 at age 78. She had 3 children, lived an ordinary life, never knew the names of the soldiers her blood saved. But 4 or 5 young men came home because she spent 30 minutes every 2 weeks giving blood. That's not heroism. That's humanity, industrialized. The blood that never ran out is still flowing today, from stranger to stranger, donor to recipient, connecting millions of people who will never meet. Because in 1941, a black doctor named Charles Drew had an idea. And in 1944, Richard Morrison hung a bottle of plasma and thought about the housewife in Iowa who made it possible. And between them, across all the factories and warehouses and ships and trucks and field hospitals, flowed the blood that saved a generation.